how do we make sure that as we move forward, that we're not leaving parts of us behind because it's advantageous for me to move forward or step on you to get to where I need to go? How do we take this social conversation and make sure that it's braided into the social well-being of our communities? And I think that's the challenge.
As our semester comes to an end, we want to leave you with our final episode of Philanthropic called Anti-Racism. Coupled with the global health crisis of COVID-19, racial inequity has proved to be another top issue in our country. We sat down with Bithiah Carter and David Moy, whose backgrounds in philanthropy and racial justice make them perfect to shed some light on how we can promote anti-racism in philanthropy work. Bithiah Carter, who has experience in a range of focus areas and currently serves as the president and CEO of New England Blacks in Philanthropy, as well as David Moy, who has been deeply involved with the Boston community in many ways and is currently serving as the Deputy Director of the Hyams Foundation. We're incredibly confident they can provide helpful insights on how philanthropists can practice anti-racism and advance racial justice.
How has your work changed over the past year due to the pandemic?
We've changed, we did a little bit of direct service. We actually put out our organization around 30,000 pieces of PPE. My house looked like a warehouse, and we're all masked up and we're trying to get this stuff out. But it really taught me to pay attention more to, for a lack of better words, boots on the ground to the street rather than just the academics. Because we have to find a way that we can bridge those two, the street and academics, to make things more just in time. And how can we make, and one of the things that has been impressed on me, how can we make the academic portion that we rely on, research, to become more agile, that is actually not just reporting what has happened, but actually offering recommendations in real time of what we can do in the future, and making sure that those recommendations are the as how can I say, least biased as possible. That means that we have to have a plethora of minds and thought leadership working through this, that it's not just inclusion, but it's diversity and equity. And so I think has been this explosion of what is the truth and how do we get the truth out to communities. And most recently, what we have done, so we came back a year later to talk about the vaccine. So we learned, and now it's become commonplace news. But if you think about March, for many of you that were students, we weren't in this dire space of, we need to think about 6 feet apart. We need to think about respirators and ventilators. You've heard a lot about the unevenness of healthcare, that as was a direct result from COVID. We've heard a lot about access and information. And I think what we have tried to do is really kind of be that broker of information and help to get information out to the communities.
What makes this COVID crisis different than past crises?
And what was different about then and now is that um, I think in the communities of color there is a recognition for anything to change that we need to organize, and we not only need to organize amongst ourselves and our specific communities, but that we have to build movements across the different communities to recognize that the threat is not just to specific communities, but to all working class and middle class communities, and that we need reform in our structures and systems.
There has been this sense, this false sense, that race is about black and white and we don't have to deal with others. That this was a time that everyone, because whether you were said to come from, and I'm going to just quote that past president that said you come from a shithole country, or whether you have been here for hundreds of years, whether you came on freely or shackled, there was this sense of who are we, in a way that I don't think the 2008 crisis created. And I think even coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, there was a focus on if we get the economics right, then we'll be okay. I think coming out of this crisis, that is not that sense. And I think the demand from nonprofits is different. The demand from the government is different. I think the demand from our businesses are different. Businesses did not sign a diversity, equity, and inclusion anything or even talk about it in 2008. At least people are talking about it now. At least people are trying to acknowledge that it happened. And in order for us to change something, you have to acknowledge that it exists. Now, whether that change actually comes is another entity. The who are we in the way that we are trying to ask these questions today, whether you're on an academic call, a business call, a nonprofit call, a government call, these issues are at least perking up in the dialogue in a way that they never have before.
What has been the most significant obstacle you've both run into in terms of aligning the interests of, different stakeholders in your work, whether those are private organizations, public organizations, the communities you serve, and what kinds of challenges and barriers have you run into the past, if any, in your work getting organizations to better address the needs of the stakeholder communities that you serve? Has there been new ones during the pandemic, or have the same persisted?
I think that that term organizing, people have been organizing. We would not have a civil rights movement if people weren't organizing. So that's nothing new. But I think what is new is the fact that, like David mentioned, we have had groups that have been coming together fighting this fight for a very long time, but it hit Main Street, right? Main Street needed relief from their rent in Wellesley. And so now you are looking at what can we do collectively together. I think that has served to really bring the interests of affinity groups together, because you are seeing this as social issues, not just those low income poor people who don't vote issues. I think the other part, that issues are becoming political. It's not just enough to organize, but it's also organizing to move something politically. So now you have an Ayanna Pressley. Now you have a mayor that is looking at police reform, because politics, people are talking about things differently that now that in the political realm says, we will vote you out, or we will make sure that you won't move forward. And I think what this ability of people looking at reformation of their social circles, of being able to have out loud these conversations that are reaching across groups, that you cannot say something is an Asian flu without everyone coming down on you. I think those are the kind of interests that I'm seeing align in both public and private sectors, that you can't say things at a corporation anymore and it's just a joke.
Talk about your fundraising process, who your donors are, and how you tell the story of your organizations in a compelling way. And related to that, what strategies have been most effective, or what stories have been most impactful in getting others to invest in marginalized communities?
Well, I'll speak to that because we definitely have to fundraise. Our fundraising is mostly from national organizations because we do not want to compete with local dollars.
So the short answer for Hyams is that we don't fundraise. We're a private foundation. We have our own resources. That was the legacy of the Hyams family. So the Hyams family made their wealth on mining and railroads. And so from early on, as a Jewish immigrant family, they have always been committed to funding community groups, particularly immigrant communities. And since the family has died, it has become a private foundation with a nonprofit structure, a nonprofit board. So we basically, our challenge is to make sure we grant make in a way that is consistent with our notion of justice. And by that, we track who we give money to. We collect information on their racial, ethnic composition, gender compositions. We want to make sure that our grants are going to the communities that are least resourced in general by private foundations and public foundations. in so much as we fundraise with other funders to convince them to support the groups and strategies that we are after. That is not about addressing symptoms, but trying to get at more root causes.
How do you both measure the impact of your work?
And I think the way we're thinking about these days is not attributional, but contributional. So what are the things we support? Who are the groups we support? What are those issues? And so what we try to do is look at the indicators that their movement towards change in those areas around, police reform, core reform, education reform. So we're looking at, what are the stories? What are the metrics? How many people are involved? How many people from the communities most impacted are actually stepping up and doing things? And unfortunately, I mean, sometimes you wait till something actually happens, and then you can look back and say, oh yeah, this finally did happen. We funded for 6-7 years. Here are the groups we funded, and here are the groups that have been working together that have been acknowledged as moving that issue. So in some ways, the way we look at it, unfortunately, is sort of a retrospective of where we've had contribution of impact.
We hope you all enjoyed our first season of Philanthropic. Throughout the semester, we have focused on addressing topics on how to achieve effective philanthropy. Each episode has discussed a different theme, but all have related in the undeniable impact that COVID-19 has had on our world, both good and bad. Stay tuned for Season 2.